Stephanie. I really appreciate you doing the introduction and have stuff. Marissa, how does it feel to be a um debut author to be launched and out in the world?
It's a little scary. Kind of like I thought it would be. But it still doesn't feel quite real. Like I'm 10 days out, which is not very many. But I've seen it out in the world and I know people are reading it, but it still feels kind of surreal. So what about you, since you're a little bit further out than me? How would you say your debut experience has been so far?
Um, it kind of similar. It still definitely didn't feel real. Especially during the launch party and talking with people. My parents came to visit. They live in another state, so have my a lot of my launch party was just focused on trying to impress them and making sure the house is clean, so on and so forth. Like, oh,
Yep.
I've totally got this handled. Yeah, I knew what I was doing the whole time. And then once they were gone, I was like, I don't have any of this handled. I don't understand any of this.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think now it's kind of that sort of honeymoon phase does start to settle after a while,
Yeah.
which is nice. Um I still it was really nice seeing it crop up in bookstores, like Third Place Books. I got to take a couple pictures with that, and obviously Malaprop has it, which has been lovely, and just seeing it out in the world. And now now it's kind of like, okay, and now on to the next book, I guess.
Yeah. That's what the day my book came out, my sister was we were having dinner and she's like, "So what do we do now?"
That is the real question.
Because because like we've been like building up to this for so long. Like I got my book deal in April 2022, so it was
Mhm,
27 months from
mhm.
book deal to publishing for me. Um and it definitely did feel a little bit like at the end of that day, I was like, okay.
Mhm. Now,
Even though I still have so many events like this and like it really is just the beginning.
mhm,
Um, like on paper, my career is 10 days old, but
mhm.
in reality, it's
It's
way, way more than that.
yeah,
So it's
it's
kind of a weird perspective thing.
yeah, it is hard because you spend so long drafting and revising and then querying, and you sign the contract. And mine was also around sometime in 2022 when the contract was
Mhm.
signed, and then there was
Yeah.
copy edit stuff. So it was literal years of focusing and obsessing over this one, and now it's out, and they're like, okay, what's next?
Yep, exactly.
I'm
So one question I wanted to ask you is there something you would change about your debut experience if you could?
um one thing that immediately comes to mind is I didn't really think about the fact of how fast places book out, no pun
Mhm.
intended.
Yeah.
I I spent a lot of time when it came to launch events waiting for the publisher to give the go ahead on things and waiting to like have meetings about it, organize what stuff to do. And
Yeah.
by the time that actually happened, um most of the places that I wanted were it was a month before launch, and most places where I wanted were like, well, we already have things then. So I had to reorganize a lot. And I think there would be I wish I had been more just kind of go for it, reserve places, talk to people and reach out to my local bookstores. I also a few people have brought this up in the Slack group already. We had a cool discussion about it, but I didn't know this that um when emailing local bookstores, it's um you're not apparently not supposed to open with I'm a local author.
Oh yeah, we had this
Yeah.
discussion. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, open with credentials first. Be like, hey, this is who I'm publishing with. This is when it's
Yep.
coming out.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, that's kind of like it goes back to the timeline being really weird. How even in the group for so long, like since 2022 or whatever. And even you and I, who have the same publisher and publish books a month
Mhm.
apart, our timelines have been completely different. Um,
Yeah.
so it's been interesting to see how like books published the same week get cover reveals at different times or
Mhm.
get trade reviews at different times and all these different
Mhm.
things. Like there's so much to learn from other authors that way
Mhm.
that I kind of feel like I'm gonna be lost putting out my
Mhm.
next book without the debut group. Like,
Oh, well,
you
you
know?
can still be in the group. You're
Yeah,
I'm
that's
not
true.
going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're stuck with me. Yeah, I definitely agree. It was fascinating both seeing things coming out in place different times and seeing how arbitrary and unrelated to your actual book it was. Like,
Hmm.
when are you gonna get when or if you're gonna get a review from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly? That's up to Kirkus and Publishers Weekly
Yep.
respectively. And they'll get around to it when they get around to it. Or and when is the cover art going to be finished? That's up to the cover artist, and it'll be finished when it's finished.
Yep.
How often does your publisher respond to emails? That depends on who's assigned your book.
Yep.
And in my
Exactly.
case, yeah, and in my case, the person I was working with Holiday House, she went on maternity leave recently, so
Yes.
my that was definitely a factor, but that was also one where it was completely unrelated to Take All of Us. It was just the everything
Yeah.
feels it's such a field where you get so little information that your
Hmm.
brain wants to jump to any sort of tangible data points you have as a sort of how am I doing metric, but there are so many data points where it's completely no relation whatsoever.
Yeah. That's what another thing in the debut group Slack, there's a channel for comparing sales numbers.
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm staying away from that.
Yeah, that's
I
probably for the best.
because it doesn't mean anything. Someone else's numbers don't mean anything to my like publisher who I want to buy my next book, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Even like even if we compared our sales, it
Mhm.
still probably wouldn't mean anything, you know, even the same
Yeah.
publisher. So I don't know why people want that want to know that information, but I also get what you're saying that like you want to cling to some data
Mhm.
point, some however many, Goodreads ads you have or
Mhm.
pre-orders or whatever. You just want
Mhm.
some like concrete information,
Mhm.
even though the information doesn't really mean all that much out of context.
Yeah, it's one of those where it can become with this sort of magical thinking, for term of like, okay, if this happens, that means that it's going well, and it feels like the equivalent of if I'm like, okay, if the weather's good, then it means I'm gonna have a good day. But well, I can't control the weather, and like those
Hmm.
those don't necessarily play into each other.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Let me see. Oh, let's talk a little bit about process. So what was your writing process like for this book? Are you like a detailed plot outline person, or are you just like open up
Well,
a blank document and go?
Um, this one was a little weird. They kind of Take All of Us was a little bit odd in that um I started the I have I've had the concept on and off since I was literally 16 years old of like the character, and I've had different ideas, and there's a cat jumping in the background. Apologies.
You're fine. I'm surprised mine hasn't shown up yet. He's
Yeah.
asleep somewhere.
Yeah, she gets very clingy when she sees I'm on Zoom and wants to hang out. And um this one was around and I did the first draft of it was when I started working at the library. I initially worked at a branch that was a pretty long bus commute away. I was on the bus for about an hour there and an hour back.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah. But I brought my laptop, and that was when I drafted the first version of it and kind of got the idea down. And that was in 2019. And I was like, all right, start of 2020, I'll polish this book about what it's like living with chronic illness and during an evacuation, everything. And then everything in
Yeah.
2020 happened, and I realized, oh, I need to completely revise this because I'm getting so much, like it turns out when I'm actually living in a lockdown, and I also started a
Yeah.
new medication at literally in January 2020, and the doctor said, okay, report back to me how like your emotions are doing, how your basis for anxiety is doing.
Oh,
And
geez.
then I was like, I don't really have a scale for this.
Yeah.
We're sort of in extenuating circumstances. I think I'm handling it better than I would have without medication. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it was one
Exactly.
where that kind of all tied in of trying to deal with this medication during the lockdown, trying to like everyone in my town being isolated, the people I knew who are chronically ill, having or sorry, those all kind of tied into the revised version, which ended up being pretty significantly different. Well, I say pretty significantly different, but there were also some things that did end up being um stuck out, which I stayed the same, which was kind of fun. The initial version was a lot more aggressive and competitive, where the initial draft was it was more about Ian and his the kids that he meets versus another group of more hardcore survivalist types.
Mm-hmm.
And there was sort of this back and forth and violent stuff, and it was fun and I enjoyed it, but it was also ultimately it wasn't the feeling that I had when I was actually experiencing a lockdown where and I ended up going with one that was a lot more um personal and intimate where Ian has enough going through with dealing with his own body changing, dealing with being a zombie and dealing with the rot and everything as such that he didn't really need that external
Yeah.
conflict going on in so much. And even those who he didn't agree with, they were all people who were going through the similar situation as he was. So I feel like the end version ended up being more empathetic and a bit more soft apocalypse style and a bit more about the internal dealing with body changes and everything. And I feel like that worked out for the better.
Yeah. So I heard you talking about in the Slack how your book changed in the editing process, like once it was bought.
Mhm.
So how much of that was after you sold the book and how much of it was just kind of like on your own?
Um, the biggest changes definitely happened on my own. Like I said, I did revisions during 2020 and then it was sold around 2022. So by that point, I'd kind of gotten the hang of the voice I want to tell. So
Yeah.
the ones after acquisitions were honestly not too terrible. They were um not too intense. They were mostly just kind of organizing scenes around to give it a stronger emotional arc and kind of have them flow into each other. One thing I did note that was kind of funny was one of the requests that came in after acquisitions was they asked to add in the scene of Ian and Monica exploring Eric's house. That was a very late addition where a big part of the plot is Ian trying to find his best friend Eric and
Hmm.
work out his feelings. And they were like, we want to know a little bit more about Eric's character and Eric's backstory and kind of build up to this. So the scene of Ian and Monica exploring Eric's house and finding these pieces of him as backstory was there and taking care of Eric's one of the things is they take care of Eric's dog that was in the backyard and they feed her and they get her water and look after her and talk about abandonment. And I get a lot of reviews that are like, why didn't Eric take care of his dog? Why didn't Eric go back for his dog? Why is all this stuff and like stop talking about dog? But in my brain, I'm like, because that was the last minute scene that I added. I didn't I added the dog for this bit and I didn't really like
Hmm.
lace her into the rest of
Hmm. Yep. I added, I think one really small, like probably insignificant scene. Um, but now reading it, like I was reading through to decide what I wanted to read tonight, and it doesn't seem like a late edition. At least I hope it doesn't. But it was just something my editor wanted to kind of like not necessarily add to an emotional arc, but to break up two scenes that were kind of like heavy. It was just like a light kind of fluff in the
Yeah.
middle.
Oh.
Um, but I hope people can't tell that it was sad at the end.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. And it's a good idea to kind of break up, add
Yeah.
some fluff and then break it up. Yeah. I did also have an edit where one of the edits I did was I took out some stuff at the beginning that explained the zombie parasite a little more. And and because it was one where it was kind of a dump of information right at the beginning and it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily needed. And then I do sometimes get reviews of people being like, I wish the zombie parasite thing was explained better. And for a while there, I forgot that I'd done that. I forgot that I'd taken out. And I was like, what do you
Oh
mean it's
yeah.
not explained better? I explained it right in the beginning, and then I realized I cut that. So it is,
Oops.
oops. It is hard finding balance, but
Yeah, it is. And it's hard to like consider what feedback is true to your story and what might not be. Because it's
mhm,
hard to like not push back against your editor, that feels too aggressive, but like
mhm,
to counter what they say because it's like, well, this person bought my book, so I'm just gonna, they know best. But you
yeah.
kind of have to stick to your own spirit of the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah, it's like that Neil Gaiman quote where it's if someone tells you something didn't work for your story, they're usually right. If someone tells you exactly how to fix it, they're usually always
Yeah.
wrong.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. Exactly. Let me see what's
mm,
next.
if you want, I can ask one a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see. Were there any moments in Joined at the Joints that you really enjoyed writing?
Um, all of them. No. Um, hmm. All of the like fun, fluffy, romantic moments I loved writing because
Aw.
there's the build up to it that I just absolutely love. But I also equally like equally as important to me in the book are the scenes that are just Ivy like dealing with her chronic illness. Like
Mhm.
there's a scene that's a doctor's appointment that's really pivotal. And then there are just some scenes where she's like talking to her family about how she's feeling and kind of coming to terms with the fact that she's not feeling great and maybe needs to get some help and change her medication. And all of that feels as much like the core of the story as the
Mhm.
romance itself does. Like they would not be the same people. They would not have the same story if they weren't chronically ill and dealing with that every day.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. It is important to it is kind of cathartic to get that out there and get that bit written and have that sort of emotional catharsis for writing that and also the fluff.
Yep.
Yeah.
The balance was difficult between that's kind of what I wrote about in my guest post for School Library Journal, um, or the Teen Librarian Toolbox on School Library Journal, was the balance between the romance and the like chronic illness conflict because I didn't want it to be like a sad
Mhm.
book.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want to like romanticize the chronic illness experience. I wanted it to be balanced and nuanced, and that was difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's especially because it's one um it can be really hard to kind of when it's such a strong focus because it's such an important part of these characters' lives and it's something they have a kind of something to deal with every day, but it's
Mhm.
something where it's not their sole personality or they're not solely about grief and about like being inspirational. It's
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to avoid entirely, was the whole
Mhm.
inspiration thing.
Mhm.
Hate that.
You're so brave. I could
Yeah.
never live like that. Like, thanks, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I had this whole like inner monologue about warrior language,
Hmm.
of the like whole chronic illness warrior thing.
Yeah.
And my agent made me take it out because they were like, this is a little aggressive.
Yeah, that was I got some of the same notes.
Yeah.
I I based a lot of mine of the affected where it was based off of the Teflon incident that happened in West Virginia where there was a bunch of Teflon dumped in the water and sort of factory runoff stuff. And there was I had a few scenes of narratives that inner monologues talking about how like how especially that people having being born with illness with side effects that are directly related to environment is something where it's kind of like, well, you're just going to have to deal with it, or um, it's one where oh, you're just like a who cares what you think negative stuff is, and I also had to trim that back because it was getting really, really aggressive. Was advised by editors like it's getting a little
Yep.
yeah, so it's hard. It's finding that balance. But I think you did a really good job with yours. So
Thank you.
let me see. But yeah, I guess yeah. I don't which side character in Joints is your favorite? Like obviously we have the main two and then we have the romance going on, but
Um, I love them all dearly, but I have written a whole other book about Avery. So
uh
I probably have to say Avery, but also Lila is very precious to me. See, I start thinking about it and I'm like, I'm gonna end up saying all
yeah,
of them.
all of every
Um,
single character.
no, but the actual point of the book came from Avery because I wrote her book first.
Oh.
And then that book sort of it serves as like a prequel where they like establish the support group.
Mhm.
Um, and so once I got to that point, I was like making, creating characters for this new support group. And I got the idea for the sisters, Ivy and Caroline, because I wanted Grant to have someone. Grant was in the original support group,
Mhm.
and I wanted Grant to have someone who had the same illness he does.
Oh.
And so then once I wrote that scene, I was like, wait,
This is a whole story here.
that's a whole other thing. So that's when, because that book, Avery's book, is actually the book I signed with my agent on.
Mhm.
So then in March 2020, which which over the next few months I had a lot of free time because um
Mhm.
I was teaching then,
Yeah.
and I was obviously not in person.
Mhm.
So I wrote the first draft of what became Joined at the Joints over that period of time.
Oh,
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 hello.
hi, kitten. Other kitten. Who's this?
That's Boots. I'm surprised he
Oh,
hasn't shown up before now. It's just because it's almost his dinner time. That's why he's getting.
uh, yeah, that makes sense. I've been avoiding this desk because it's upstairs and we've been having a heat wave.
Hmm.
So, I've been using my laptop downstairs more. So BB's gotten excited to see me at a new place. She's here. Yep.
So
Use.
which side character is your favorite?
Oh my goodness. I do, like you said, I like all of them. I don't know. I I really like I like Angel a lot. It's one of those where Ian is obviously all characters are sort of based on different facets of me and different peers, and
Yeah.
as my partners put it, me in a different hat. Yeah. But
I love
Angel, yeah, it's fun. But Angel is the one I feel like that's most closely representative of how I was as a teenager growing up in
that.
um the rural actually rural Wisconsin. That was where I was debating setting it, and I ended up scooching the location around a fair bit. So there's a lot of um it's in West Virginia, but there are a lot of rural Wisconsin elements that kind of bled through, including Angel is one where um very autistic, very likes heavy jackets, very convinced she's the smartest person in the room and that everyone else needs to respect that, kind of aloof and aggressive. Like her first thing when she shows up is talking about how the talking about how there's an Ian's meeting another undead person, and she's talking about how they're undead and how like you need to stab them in the brainstem to remove that stuff, just totally nonchalant, like it's a cool which is how I would have done it
Mhm.
as a fellow like 14-year-old. I would have just been like, hey, I know about this thing, let me tell you about it in
Yep.
gruesome detail. And if you think that's gross, then you're obviously not intelligent enough to appreciate it. And I've definitely gotten a lot of mixed feedback on her. People tend to be like, I know I reference feedback a lot, which is probably I should stop reading it. That's probably, but people tend to be like either she's my favorite and I relate to her so much, or she's completely insufferable, which
Mhm.
yeah, that tracks. That's I very much Take All of Us is definitely on the lower end of YA. Ian's 15, Angel's 14, Monica's 15, Eric's 16. So they're kind of right on that borderline. And I wanted to kind of get that across where they're empathetic characters, but they're also very much younger teenagers who are still kind of
Mhm.
figuring out who they are and kind of struggling with self-identity, which is a recurring theme. So we get characters like Angel, who's very aggressive and withdrawn. Monica, she's also one of my favorites where she's very perfectionist. She always has a list of things to do. She's very she is one where I really enjoy doing the conflict between her and Ian, because they have the thing where it's sort of like Ivy and Grant, where they both have very similar disabilities. But
Mhm.
unlike Ivy and Grant, where it starts with buds of romance, this one sparks a very heated rivalry
Mhm. Yeah.
because they're both Ian's low-key convinced himself that it's almost like sympathy for disability is like this limited resource, and she's hogging it all by being prettier than he is and being like having a more visible hi boots.
Hello.
Like she walks with a cane because she's got in my head she deals with like chronic fatigue and weakness, so she has like a mobility aid. So he's jealous that she has a more visible disability support, unlike with his epilepsy, with his seizures, where he has the medical alert braces, but he doesn't really like do this. And she seems more helpful. And it turns out that's her own coping mechanism, is that she's very like, and she talks about it in the story where she's like, if I look good enough, if I do everything perfectly, if I do it right, then like that'll make up for me, quote unquote, being a burden. And she's
Yep.
got that, yeah, and she's got that very young teenager perfectionist sort of complex, and it ends up kind of giving her this like mental breakdown towards the end, where she can't handle the idea that when they're in this lockdown and when it's just them, that there's no one to perform towards. And she's so used to being putting on this face and putting on this performative thing that she doesn't know what to do when they're alone and when they're isolated together. And that's and I really related to that as someone who's like very used to masking and used to performing, and then when it's on my own, it's like, well, who am I when I'm by myself?
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm not used to be. So I very much relate to her, and I relate, and I love how she and Angel and Ian are all kind of this like trifecta of different extremes, where she's more like putting on perfectionist face. Angel's more completely like rejecting that, ignoring it, and going in the opposite direction of I'm going to be aggressively myself and aggressively off-putting and push everyone away, and then realize I actually need support and I don't. And Ian's kind of the one that's helping balance them out and talk with each other and being like, all right, Monica, you don't have to push yourself so hard. And Angel, you don't have to shove everyone away. So I enjoyed him trying to find that balance, and all three of them kind of supporting each other where they have these kind of struggles. And I think they're cute.
Right? That's the most important part.
Yeah,
So, okay, one question I have is
go for it.
that, okay, hello.
Hello again.
You and I have the same publisher, same season, and also with Sydney Langford's debut, which is the end of the month, same publisher, same season, we kind of show like the breadth of disability representation in YA.
Mm-hmm.
Because Sydney's is a friendship story, mine is a rom-com, yours is horror. Like
Mm-hmm.
we show kind of a little bit of everything that disability and chronic illness can represent in YA.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that representation has evolved recently?
It has changed really dramatically in just the past few years. I feel
Yeah.
like I I've talked a few times because one of the things that's been kind of recurring that I've talked about is I have a younger sibling who is 17 right now, and there's about a 10-year age gap between us, a little bit more. Um, so I've I've kind of gotten to check in and view sort of this the generational gap almost
Hmm.
of what I grew up with versus what she's growing up with YA and what she's experiencing. And I have mentioned before, like one of the things I feel like the early 2000s in particular, media and stuff looking back, it was really, really mean. Like I don't know how to put it. Early 2000s media was so mean-spirited, and so like you'd see the R slur casually thrown around all the time.
Yeah.
South Park was huge. Um, early internet was like, hey, Boots again. Like early internet was sort of a wild wasteland of 4chan posting and
Mhm.
Shock's websites and like Happy Tree Friends and stuff. And obviously there were good things too, like the early Neopets and GeoCities and such, but there were um and a lot of really casual racism, a lot of really casual ableism, like I remember with like when crop tops were big, they were like, oh, you have to be like, well, if you can't wear a crop top, it's because like you're fat, da da da, like body image and like personal appearance and ableism was huge. And I feel like at least with my sister's generation, it sort of almost pendulum swung back in the other direction where they're recognizing that millennials our early days growing up were real wild and really mean. And I feel like a lot of YA readers and such tend to be um that they're trying harder to be a lot more empathetic and trying to be more understanding and talking with people. And even just with reviews, I feel a lot of people are saying that reviews can be vicious, but I feel like the most vicious reviews are from people who are more adults, more who are reading this and are who are more merciless, whereas people who are more teenage reading it, they tend to be more like, I feel really seen, I really enjoyed this, or even if it's just
Mhm.
I didn't enjoy this, they'll say like it just wasn't for me, but I really like the characters as such. And um it's just I don't know, it's one where I think back to how back when I was a teen and how things like they gay marriage wasn't a legal thing. There was a big push for that, and how gay marriage was a thing, how the you had to that was back when you had to have insurance could deny you for having a quote pre-existing condition.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was a huge thing of like if we found out it was pre-existing, you can't get insured, and it still is a thing. It's less so now. The if you get married and you're disabled, then you have to give up all of your rights and such. And those are things where they're obviously ones where there's still progress to be made. Obviously, there's still homophobia. There's still limitations of if you're on medical disability, you can only earn so much money, have so much money at a time, which is absolute nonsense. And such. And there's all these stuff, but the rate at which they've kind of pushed back and the rate in which it's kind of shifted gears from like towards aggressive acceptance of. And I was talking with my sibling when my family was over for dinner, and it was we were having food and she was rocking back and forth and she was super casually like, oh, it's the it might be the autism, and just super casually like, and I was like, that was something where if you said that out loud of yourself when I was a kid, that'd be
Yep.
grounds for complete ostracization. It's one where there definitely are ones where it's kind of there are some issues where it's almost become in some ways a little bit too cutesy, where I feel like I see people on TikTok who are like, oh, I'm just a little Delulu or I'm a little OCD, and I'm like, that's not, I think that's a little
Yeah.
bit too cutesy-fied. I think like there should to be, but it was one where the fact that it's become so casual and so like normalized and so it's like it's drastically different from I don't really
Yep.
have a point. I'm sort of meandering.
No, you're fine. No, I just think like when I got my book deal even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have never thought I would be a part of a season that is almost completely disabled books by disabled authors. Like,
Yeah.
it obviously disability representation was there, and there
Mhm.
were disabled authors like fighting for it every day,
Mhm.
but I feel like it has truly grown so much in just the past couple of years, and
Mhm.
it's just really cool to be a part of that.
We have a pride flag now. That's so cool.
I know, yeah.
Yeah. Our library did a display just this month because it's Disability Pride
Yeah,
Month.
Disability Pride Month, yep.
They did a whole selection of disabled books and put up the flag, and that's something even last year wasn't a thing. It's been so cool to see.
It has, yeah, it's been really awesome. And it's been really nice to connect with a bunch of other disabled authors putting books out now, and the ones who are going to be putting books out next year and the next, because publishing is always thinking so far in advance.
Yeah. Yeah. It it is funny. I've been having that with uh when I've been doing the next book, the book two that I pitched to my agent, one of the revisions I've been doing is the main character is he does video like he's an online video viral video star, and I've been having to edit it because at the time I drafted it, TikTok didn't exist.
Oh my
So,
God,
so
wow.
I had to learn how TikTok works and learn about TikTok community. At the time, it was Vine, and that was when I drafted it, it was
Yep,
before Vine went.
that's
So
fine.
I'm like, okay, this
Yeah.
is very relevant to what he'd be doing, but it's one where um trying to keep up with okay, how would this affect my characters? What it's been fun.
I am sorry to interrupt. We're just getting to that time to get to questions. And so I wanted to pop in and see. And Marissa or Leif, did y'all want to do any reading before we go to questions? And Marissa, you mentioned earlier that you had picked a selection,
No,
but no
I'm
pressure.
good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. And or if you have another, Leif, if you have another question for Marissa before we go to audience questions. Okay. All righty. So thank you so much for the discussion. I know that any of the writers out there have probably picked up a lot from your conversation. And Jamie has a question for both of you. How many versions of your books do you have? I don't think I've heard this question before. Or do you work off the same document throughout the process? And yeah, Marissa, do you want to start?
I don't work off the same document because what if I mess up? And so I have a bunch of different, each draft I do myself, plus each draft I turn into my agent, plus each draft I do with my editor. So I've never counted, but for joints, that has to be at least 10, probably more. But I keep all of them. So if I make a change I don't like, I can just go back.
Leif, what about you?
Yeah. Hang on one second. I can
You're
actually
checking
pull
right
up
now?
my I can pull up my file. 22. Yeah. I work in Google Docs, so I actually have I can pull up my folder right now of everything. And there's 22 different versions. Some of these are definitely a bit a bit different than others. Like, for example, it turns out Google Docs will start to lag once a document hits over 50,000 words. So
Yeah.
some of these are part 1, part 2, part 3. Some of these are, I have a doc that I keep specifically of bits that I cut out because I do, yeah, I do feel like that makes it a little easier to sort of kill your darlings, is if I'm not quote unquote killing them, I'm just putting them in a separate document that I can reference later.
Yep.
Let's see, I have the first draft, I have several revised versions. I have a couple bits and pieces that I wrote in various locations, like that I wrote on the bus, that I wrote on my phone, that I wrote in a workshop, that I've just sort of emailed to myself to splice together later. But yeah, there's 22 separate documents.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that question before. So that's I think it's going to continue to be something I'm curious about when talking to other authors. Thanks for that. So both of you feels like with your novels are getting at some similar themes, but in very different environments, right? In very different settings, with very different backdrops. So I wonder if you could both talk a little bit about that. Marissa, if you could talk to your decision to make your novel a romance novel primarily. And Leif, if you could talk about how you came around to using the zombie apocalypse, a kind of zombie apocalypse as your backdrop.
Yeah, so for me, I wanted to make it a romance just because romance novels are what I love so much. Like that's what I know. And for me, making it, like I said, I didn't want to write a sad book. So for me, the easiest way to do that was to make it a romance. It kind of never was anything else to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it does, and I like that a lot. For me, mine was personal self-indulgence because I really like zombies and I have strong feelings that I feel like a lot of people tend to be like, oh, zombies are boring, they're the weakest sort of supernatural creature, they're overplayed. And of course they're overplayed because I feel like most people tend to write them in the exact same way. They don't, where it's a zombie apocalypse or it's the end of the world where they're just sort of mindless creatures where there's not a lot of I've seen people get really heated even just if it's like if you have a book where zombies move fast, people be like, well, that's wrong. That's not how they do. And there's a very set idea of what they are, what they can do. That tends to be kind of limiting. And I feel like that's part of what leads people to say that, oh, they're overplayed. But I really love the idea of, because I was struggling myself with I have a lot of kind of memory brain damage issues where short-term memory loss, focus loss, issues with that, and they got a lot worse during pandemic, and it literally felt like my body was kind of slowly shutting down or these stuff. And that kind of led to the fascination of a character who's trying to deal with his body actively decaying or like having these health issues and stuff, and how does he like learn to cope, how does he interact with people around him, how do you recognize yourself when your body that makes up yourself is acting against you. And I always thought that was a really interesting theme with dealing with disability. And I liked and there's a lot of body horror aspects to being disabled that I feel like horror lets you kind of approach, where there's an expectation that you kind of have to gloss over it and sort of sanitize it to make it approachable. But unless you're writing a horror, in which case you're allowed to be grotesque, you're allowed to take up space, you're allowed to like kind of rage against the machine and this stuff. And that was kind of an overarching theme with that, was finding ways to take up space and exist as this very raw, organic thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Liv. So with that being said about these novels, are either of you thinking about, I know you're thinking about your next ones, most likely, and are you looking at any departures, telling stories in a different context? And Leif, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, right now I actually have two manuscripts that I sent off to my agent, and she's still kind of deciding between them. So we'll see how it goes. They're both sort of departures in a different way. They're both also YA. We're still kind of continuing in that space. And they're both stories that sort of include these supernatural elements that tie into the main character's struggles and everything. But one of them is I sort of mentioned to it before. It's the main character is a musician that was part of a very viral indie band, and there was an incident where their lead singer died in a freak accident during a live stream that they were doing, but then their lead singer's account still has posts queued up and is still updating, and and the posts are getting increasingly surreal and strange. So there's that sort of supernatural element of like, is this a ghost? Is this a hacker or a bot hacking it? Or is this something where his like spirit of this like internet persona that he built up is still there? And it's mostly about tackling grief and tackling that sort of artificial immortality that happens when you have something online, because things online will stay up and will still exist. And I was thinking about that because I've lost people in my life before, but their things like their Facebook account still exists, their Twitter account still exists, and those are going to be there presumably until the site goes down. And so that grief ties with ghosts. And the other one is more fae focused, and it's about a girl who she wanted, when she was a preteen, she wanted to be a magical girl and go on adventures, and she went into basically into the Feywilds and got that. But then when she became an older teenager, she sort of aged out of that system and got kicked out, and now has to adjust to being a person. And it's sort of her like learning to adjust to things, and also like kind of learning to embrace her past self with this her past cringe self, all of her very girlish interests. She sort of has this aggressive like, she's going through an I'm not like other girls, and actually I hate all girly things and I think they're stupid and stuff thing. And because she is going through this trauma and going through this adjustment, and she has to kind of learn to like kind of embrace that and like enjoy that, appreciate that again. Well, so yes, the same idea of there's a supernatural thing, and also it parallels this character's personal growth. Different flavors.
Yeah. Marissa, what about you?
Yeah, so my next book is not as much centered on physical disability as my first one is. The main character does have chronic migraine, but it's less of a central like plot element. Instead, it's more about like autistic burnout and
Mm.
academic burnout, and that like point where you stop being a gifted kid and you have to like figure out how to be a normal adult. Um, and so that's what like most of my books are upper YA, so it's that like transition to adulthood that's really scary. That's a common theme no matter what, as well as disability too, but this one is like pretty college focused and academic focused, and that's a little bit different. The main characters are like wildly different. Ivy and Murphy are very, very different. And I think it's been cool to kind of go to a different place.
Yeah. Sure. Excellent. Well, we are almost at the top of the hour. And it's been great to share this space with you two this evening. Thank you so much. And so I just want to give both of you the opportunity to share any final thoughts before we say goodnight to our audience.
My final thought is thank you for having me.
You are so
This was
welcome,
fun.
Leif. Thank you.
Same. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for talking with me, Leif. Thanks
Yeah.
for watching, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And so to everyone out there, just a reminder to pick up your copies of Joined at the Joints and Take All of Us at your local independent bookstore, or check them out from your library, visit your librarians. We encourage you to do either of those things. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for being with us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again. Yeah, have fun out there, stay safe, and as cool as you can. Good night, everybody.
Likewise. Take care. Thank you for hosting.
You're so welcome.